The first light of dawn spilled over the jagged cliffs of planet Vera, casting long shadows across the rocky peaks. In a small half-broken nest tucked on the edge of a sheer drop, a tiny dragonling stirred. His scales were soft and pale, like fresh clouds in the morning sky, and his wings trembled as he tried to stretch them. He was alone. The wind whispered through the rocks and the cold made him shiver, but he could not move far. He waited. Soren had hatched in the night, under a sky sprinkled with distant stars. His mother had been gone and so had his siblings. The nest, once warm and full of life, felt empty and silent now. He nudged a small tuft of moss with his snout, hoping for the familiar comfort of another dragon, but only the cold stone answered. He let out a soft, high-pitched squeak. The sound felt fragile in the vast mountains. Days passed, and Soren learned to move carefully along the edge of the cliffs. The other dragons of the region flew above him in tight packs, powerful and loud, their scales glinting like molten metal. They noticed him sometimes but never stopped. When he tried to join them, they hissed and turned away, leaving him staring at the sky, wings flapping weakly. Hunger pressed at his belly but pride kept him from crying out too much. Soren explored the nearby rocks, hopping from ledge to ledge, discovering little pools of water and patches of moss that smelled faintly of life. He tried catching small insects and lizards, but his clumsy attempts often ended with him falling onto his belly, scraping his soft scales. Each time he fell he called out, half in frustration, half in hope. His voice echoed over the cliffs, but nothing came to answer it. The mountain was cruel, full of sharp edges and silent dangers. At night, he curled up in the nest, trying to stay warm with his tiny wings folded tightly around him. He looked up at the stars and imagined someone looking back at him. Sometimes he thought he saw lights moving in the sky, small glimmers that were not stars. He didn't know what they were, but they made him feel a little less alone. One evening, a shadow passed over the cliff, a bigger dragon gliding above him. Soren's heart raced. He flapped his wings as hard as he could, trying to follow, but the wind was too strong and he tumbled back onto the rocks. The larger dragon didn't notice him. Soren lay there for a moment, chest heaving, and let out a small, mournful roar. The echo bounced off the cliffs and returned to him, a lonely sound in a lonely world. Despite the cold and hunger, Soren's mind was always reaching out, looking for a sign that someone cared. Every gust of wind that rustled the rocks, every distant shadow that passed across the cliff, he imagined it was someone coming for him. A mother. A friend. Someone to tell him he was safe. The nights were the hardest. The wind howled through the cliffs and the stars seemed farther away than ever. Soren would wrap himself in his tiny wings and whisper into the darkness, hoping that somewhere, someone was listening. He didn't understand the humans who sometimes flew above the planet in silver ships, their engines humming quietly in the night, but there was a strange comfort in seeing them. He could not reach them and they did not seem to notice him. Yet somehow just knowing they were there made the emptiness a little less sharp. One morning after a particularly cold night, Soren tried something new. He climbed to the very edge of the cliff, spread his wings wide and jumped. The wind lifted him, tossing him forward, and for a few seconds he felt the strange thrill of flight. His heart soared with hope. Maybe if he kept trying he could reach the others. Maybe someone would see him. Maybe he would finally have a family again. When he landed, panting and trembling, he looked up at the sky. Something flickered among the stars, a tiny glimmer moving with purpose. Soren tilted his head and stared. For the first time since he hatched he felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was not entirely alone in the universe. He curled up again in his nest, letting the first rays of sunlight warm his scales. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind, waiting for the next day, waiting for the moment someone would come. He did not know who or when or why, but deep inside Soren believed it was possible. He was small. He was fragile. But he was waiting, and sometimes that was enough. And so, the lonely hatchling waited on the edge of the cliffs, a tiny heart full of hope, eyes fixed on the stars, dreaming of the love he had yet to find. Soren had learned to survive, but the world around him was harsh and unkind. Each day was a test. The mountains were full of jagged rocks, loose stones, and sudden drops that could end a dragonling's life in a heartbeat. Even food was hard to find. The small insects and lizards he caught barely filled his belly, and sometimes he went hungry. Yet he kept moving, kept searching, because sitting still meant certain death. The larger dragons still flew above him, their wings beating with power and confidence. They hunted in groups and ignored him completely. Soren had tried once more to approach them, hopping from cliff to cliff and letting out a soft call. The sound of his tiny wings flapping against the wind was almost drowned by the beating of theirs. One of the older dragons hissed at him, sharp and threatening, and he had no choice but to retreat. He crouched behind a rock, trembling, feeling smaller and weaker than ever. Soren began to notice other dangers too. Small predators, sleek and quick, stalked him from the shadows. He had to leap from ledge to ledge, hiding in narrow crevices, and sometimes he failed. Once, a predator lunged at him from above. He flapped his wings as hard as he could and barely escaped, his claws scraping the stone as he fell. The predator gave up, disappearing into the darkness, but Soren lay on the ground, heart racing, wings shaking. He realized that the world did not care if he survived. Only he could make it through. Sometimes when he rested he looked up at the sky. The stars shone cold and distant, but among them he noticed the small flashes of light. Human ships, orbiting silently, gliding above the planet. He did not understand them, but he watched. Their light seemed calm, almost comforting, even though he could not reach them. Maybe someone up there was watching him, he thought. Maybe they would care. Soren spent hours exploring the cliffs, learning which rocks held insects, which pools of water were safe to drink from, and where the wind could lift him a little higher when he tried to fly. He fell many times, scraped his small scales, and cut his tiny wings on jagged stones. Each time he fell he called out, hoping for someone to answer. But only the echo of his own voice returned. The mountain was vast and indifferent. He began to dream of having a friend, a protector, or a mother. He imagined someone warm and strong, someone who would let him nest close and teach him to fly properly. In his dreams, he could feel the warmth of another dragon beside him, hear a soft growl of reassurance, and taste food without fear of hunger. But each morning when he woke and saw the empty cliffs, he realized the dream was gone. He was still alone. One day while exploring a narrow path between two cliffs, he spotted movement below. A group of smaller lizards scuttled across the rocks. Soren crouched, eyes wide, ready to hunt. As he lunged, a shadow fell across him. A larger dragon swooped down, powerful and fast. Soren froze, wings half spread, unsure if he should run or fight. The larger dragon circled once, hissed, and then disappeared, leaving him trembling on the cliff. It was a lesson he would not forget. In this world, even other dragons could be dangerous. Hunger gnawed at him, and he began to recognize the signs of danger. The mountain was full of creatures that could kill him. Falling rocks, hidden predators, sudden storms, any of these could end his life. Yet Soren did not give up. He had learned to hide, to move quietly, and to watch the wind and the sun for guidance. Even when other dragons ignored him, he kept trying, flapping his wings a little higher each day, testing the air currents, learning the rhythm of the cliffs. At night, he returned to his nest and curled into a tight ball, shivering in the cold. The stars glimmered above him, and sometimes he imagined the human lights moving gently in the sky. He whispered tiny hopes into the darkness, imagining that somehow someone might hear him. "I'm here," he would say. "I'm small but I'm waiting." And though no voice replied, he felt a small spark of hope. Soren was not yet strong, not yet fully grown, and the world around him did not understand him. Other dragons ignored him, predators hunted him, and the mountains offered no mercy. But he had one gift that kept him alive: hope. Even in the face of hunger and danger, he believed that someone, somewhere, might come to care for him. And so, he kept moving, learning, and growing. Every flap of his wings was a step toward survival. Every cry into the empty cliffs was a call for a future he could not yet see. Soren, the lonely dragonling, faced a world that did not understand him. Yet, despite it all, he kept his small heart full of hope. Because somewhere, among the stars or on the cliffs, he believed someone was waiting for him too. Soren had grown a little stronger since the last days of hunger and fear. His wings were longer now and his claws sharper. The mountains were still dangerous, but he had learned their secrets. He knew where to hide, where the wind could lift him, and where predators lurked. Still he was lonely. The other dragons did not accept him, and the stars above seemed distant and silent. One quiet morning as he perched on a cliff's edge, he saw a new light in the sky. It was different from the distant stars and satellites he had watched before. It moved with purpose, a smooth silver glow against the deep blue of the sky. Soren tilted his head, curious but cautious. He flapped his wings lightly and followed it with his eyes. The light grew brighter, descending toward the cliffs. The light belonged to a human ship, small and sleek, landing gently on a nearby plateau. Smoke and sparks did not rise from it. It was silent except for a low hum. Soren's heart raced. He had never seen anything like it. The ship's ramp lowered and a figure stepped out. She wore a silver suit that reflected the sunlight, and her eyes, visible through the helmet, were wide and gentle. The human moved slowly, carefully, scanning the rocks and cliffs. She carried something small in her hands, food, perhaps, or tools. Soren crouched behind a boulder, wings folded tightly. He had learned to hide from danger, but this was not like the predators he knew. There was something different in her movements, a careful calmness that made his claws hesitate. Days passed and Soren watched the human from a distance. She did not seem to hunt him or harm him. She moved gently across the rocks, observing, marking places with small devices, and sometimes speaking softly into a tiny box on her suit. Soren could not understand the sounds, but they were calm and reassuring. One morning, Soren's curiosity overcame his fear. He climbed a small ledge closer to where the human was standing. She looked up just as he stepped into view. For a moment, they stared at each other. Soren's small wings twitched nervously, and the human froze, holding out a hand slowly. She did not make sudden movements. Instead, she knelt, lowering herself closer to his level. Soren's heart pounded. He had waited so long for someone to notice him, to care. He took a tiny step forward, then another. The human offered a small piece of fruit, shiny and sweet-smelling. Hesitantly, he sniffed it, then touched it with his nose. It was different from anything he had eaten before. Encouraged, he took a small bite, his wings trembling in excitement. The human smiled under her helmet. "There you are," she said softly. "Little one, you've been alone too long." The words felt strange but comforting. Soren did not understand them fully, but he felt the meaning. She meant kindness. She meant safety. Over the next days, Soren began to trust her more. He approached her carefully, letting her place her hand on his head. It felt warm and gentle. For the first time since he hatched, someone had offered him care willingly. He leaned into her touch, a soft purr rising from his throat. The human, whose name was Alara, seemed fascinated by him. She examined his wings, inspected his claws, and offered him food from her pack. She spoke to him in calm, slow words, repeating the same sounds over and over. Soren could not speak, but he began to mimic her, making small noises that sounded like her words. Each attempt made her laugh softly, and Soren felt a strange happiness bloom in his chest. There were moments of fear too. Soren flinched when other dragons flew overhead or when the wind shifted sharply. But Alara stayed with him, never forcing him, always patient. She let him explore the plateau and nearby cliffs while keeping a careful watch. She had not come to claim him, he realized, but to be with him, to watch over him, to help him grow. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Soren perched on a high ledge while Alara watched from below. He tried flapping his wings, feeling the wind lift him slightly. Alara clapped softly and encouraged him with a gentle voice. For the first time, Soren felt excitement instead of fear. Flying was no longer just survival, it was possibility. The stars began to appear overhead, twinkling faintly. Soren looked up at them and thought of the ships he had seen before, floating silently above the planet. Perhaps they had noticed him now. Perhaps someone else cared. But even if no one else came, he realized he had found someone. Alara. Someone who would not ignore him, who would not leave him alone on the cliffs. As night fell, Soren curled near her feet while she cleaned his small scratches and whispered soft words. He felt warmth he had never known, and for the first time since hatching, he allowed himself to hope. The world was still dangerous, the cliffs still sharp and unforgiving, but now he was not entirely alone. A new chapter had begun, one that might lead him beyond survival toward something greater. Trust, friendship, and perhaps even love. Soren closed his eyes, listening to her gentle hum, and imagined flying beside her, together, under the stars. The lonely hatchling had found the first spark of connection, and it glowed brighter than any star he had ever seen. Soren had grown stronger since meeting Alara, but trust was not easy for a young dragon. Every day was a new test. The cliffs remained sharp and dangerous, predators still roamed, and the larger dragons above never fully accepted him. Yet now he had someone to guide him, someone who seemed to care. Alara spent hours with him every day. She showed him how to flap his wings properly, how to use the wind to lift himself higher, and how to judge the cliffs so he would not fall. At first, Soren was clumsy. He tried to jump from a small ledge only to crash into a pile of rocks below. He cried out in frustration and Alara rushed to him, careful not to scare him. She spoke softly, her hands gentle, and offered him food. "It's okay, little one," she said. "Try again." Soren tried again and again. Each failure made him more careful. Each time he landed safely, he felt a little stronger, a little braver. Alara praised him for even the smallest successes. Slowly he began to trust her completely. When she reached out a hand, he no longer hesitated. When she spoke, he listened. But the world outside their small plateau did not understand their bond. One afternoon, a predator slipped close to their shelter, a sleek, dark creature with sharp claws and teeth. Soren froze, unsure what to do. Ilara stepped forward, making herself large and loud, waving her arms. The predator hesitated, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. Soren realized that even though he had grown strong, he still needed protection, and that there was more to trust than flying or hunting. It was knowing someone would stand by you. The cliffs themselves tested them too. A sudden storm swept through the mountains one morning, winds howling, rain pouring down in sheets. Soren struggled to cling to the rocks, his wings soaked and heavy. Ilara called to him from below, her voice steady despite the roar of the storm. "Soren, hold on. I'm here." He flapped his wings desperately, fighting the wind, and somehow managed to reach a small ledge near her. She wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time he felt truly safe. The storm raged around them, but together they survived it. Soren also began to learn more than just survival. Ilara taught him small things, simple sounds and gestures like look, come, and wait. He mimicked her, making soft chirps and growls that almost sounded like words. Each time he succeeded, Ilara's eyes shone, and her laughter filled the mountains. It was strange for Soren, hearing happiness directed at him. He had never known that kind of care. Even the other dragons began to notice him differently. At first, they hissed and avoided him, but after watching him soar with Ilara's guidance, they seemed curious. Soren flapped his wings proudly, showing off his growing strength. Though they did not approach, he sensed their acknowledgement, a silent respect forming where there had been rejection. Despite these small victories, Soren struggled with fear. Sometimes he would panic when a shadow passed overhead, or when he lost balance mid-flight. Ilara never scolded him. She let him pause, breathing deeply, and then tried again. Slowly, Soren learned that fear did not mean weakness. It meant caution, and with patience it could be overcome. Days turned into weeks. Soren's scales had grown shinier, his wings stronger, and his eyes brighter. More than that, his heart had grown. He no longer felt the deep, aching loneliness he had carried since hatching. Instead, there was a warmth that he could not name, a bond, a connection, a love that came not from blood but from care and trust. One morning, Ilara set up a small course on the cliffs. Rocks, ledges, and wind currents challenged him to fly and land with precision. Soren flapped his wings hard, soaring over gaps he had never crossed before. Sometimes he missed, falling onto the rocks below, but Ilara was always there. "You can do it, Soren." "I know you can," she said, her voice steady and calm. Each time he succeeded, he chirped in delight and she clapped. That evening, after the training, Soren perched on a high cliff, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors he had never noticed before. Ilara sat beside him, offering food and warmth. He leaned against her gently, feeling her heartbeat through the small armor of her suit. He realized that she had become more than a guide or protector. She was family, the mother he had waited for all his life. The night fell, stars twinkling above, and Soren whispered softly to the sky, a small, hopeful sound. The cliffs were still sharp, the predators still lurked, but now he knew he was not alone. He had someone who believed in him, someone who would stay even when the world was harsh and unforgiving. He had Ilara, and that was enough to make him brave. Soren stretched his wings one last time that night, feeling the strength he had gained through trials, and closed his eyes with a contented sigh. The lonely Dragonling was no longer just surviving. He was learning, growing, and discovering the kind of love he had always waited for. And for the first time he could imagine a future where he was truly free, where he was not alone, and where he could soar among the cliffs and the stars with someone who cared. The morning air was crisp, and the sun cast a golden glow over the cliffs of Vera. Soren stretched his wings, feeling the wind lift him higher than ever before. The months of training with Ilara had changed him. His scales shimmered in the sunlight, stronger and brighter than before. His wings were steady, powerful, and ready. But it wasn't just his body that had grown, it was his heart. He had learned to trust, to hope, and to love. Ilara watched him from below, her eyes shining with pride. "You're ready, Soren," she called. "Show me how far you can go." The Dragonling chirped, a happy, soft sound that echoed across the cliffs, and leapt into the air. He soared higher and higher, twisting and turning with precision and grace. The wind rushed past him, and for the first time he did not feel fear. He felt freedom. But the cliffs were not done testing them. A sudden tremor shook the rocks beneath Soren's claws, and a small avalanche of stones tumbled down the mountainside. He veered sharply, almost losing control. Ilara ran forward, calling out to him, guiding him with her calm voice. Soren flapped harder, dodging the falling rocks, and landed safely on a narrow ledge. He looked at her, his eyes wide, and she smiled. "See? You can handle anything," she said softly. Later, while the sun was high in the sky, a shadow passed overhead. Soren looked up and saw a group of larger dragons circling above, their wings beating powerfully. They had noticed him. Their eyes were curious, almost respectful. Soren tilted his head, feeling proud. He had grown strong not just because of his body, but because of Alara's patience, care, and belief in him. Suddenly, one of the dragons dove toward the plateau. Soren's instinct screamed at him. This was danger. But then he realized the dragon was not attacking him. It was moving toward something else, and in that moment he understood. He had learned to read the signs, to trust himself and Alara, and to act when needed. Without warning, a piece of the cliff above them crumbled, and a heavy rock began to fall toward Alara. Soren's heart raced. He dove, wings beating as fast as he could, and caught the rock in his claws just before it could strike her. He rolled to the side, letting it crash harmlessly into the ground below. Alara gasped, eyes wide, and then hugged him tightly. "Soren, you saved me," she exclaimed. The other dragons hovered above, watching silently. For the first time, Soren felt a sense of belonging. He had proven himself not just to himself, but to the creatures who had once ignored him. He was not alone. He had a family now. As evening fell, Alara led Soren to the edge of a high cliff, overlooking the endless horizon. "Look at this," she said softly. "All of this is yours to explore. And you'll never have to do it alone." Soren spread his wings, feeling the wind lift him, and took a soaring flight above the cliffs. Alara watched from below, cheering him on. He dove, spun, and glided effortlessly, feeling the joy of flight and freedom. The stars began to appear, twinkling like distant fireflies in the darkening sky. Soren gazed up at them, thinking of the human ships he had seen months ago. Perhaps they had noticed him now. Perhaps others would come. But it did not matter. He had found the one who mattered most. Alara, the human who had fallen from the stars into his life, the mother he had waited for so long. Night fell and the cliffs were calm. Soren curled near Alara, resting his head against her legs. He felt safe, warm, and loved. The mountain wind whispered through the rocks, but he no longer felt fear. The predators, the storms, the other dragons, they were all challenges he could face because he had someone who believed in him. Alara stroked his soft scales, smiling. "You've grown so much, little one," she whispered. "And you've taught me something too. That love isn't about being the same. It's about caring, protecting, and never giving up on someone." Soren purred softly, nuzzling her hand. He could not speak, but he understood. Words were not needed. Their bond was stronger than anything spoken. Together they watched the stars, imagining the possibilities beyond the cliffs, beyond the mountains, even beyond their world. The lonely Dragonling who had once waited in silence was now a creature of strength, courage, and hope. He had faced the world and survived, but more importantly he had found love and family. Soren lifted his wings once more, testing the wind, and then looked at Alara. In that moment he knew that no matter how vast the universe was, he would never be alone again. He had a bond that transcended species, mountains, and even the stars themselves. He had found home. And as they stood together on the cliffs, watching the planets and stars above, it was clear that this was only the beginning of their journey, together, unstoppable and full of hope. The orphaned Dragonling had waited for love, and now from the stars, it had finally come.